They told her she was lucky to even be in the room. They had spent 5 years whispering that she was nothing more than an ambitious, opportunistic nobody. A temporary placeholder. A simple girl from the forgotten Midwest who had managed to trap a sterling heir into marriage. So, when Marcus Sterling slid the meticulously prepared divorce papers across the vast mahogany table, his mouth was set in an arrogant line of expectation. He anticipated the performance. The flood of desperate tears, the inevitable begging, the high-pitched scene designed to guilt him into a larger settlement. But Elena didn't cry. She didn't scream or throw the heavy Mont Blanc inkwell. She simply picked up the expensive pen Marcus had provided, signed her name with a slow, steady hand, and walked out of the towering Sterling mansion with nothing but a single standard carry-on bag. Marcus genuinely believed he had won a clean victory. He thought he was finally unburdened and free to elevate the socialite of his dreams, Chloe Vanderhoven, to her rightful place. He had no earthly idea that in precisely 48 hours, the deafening roar of a specialized Gulfstream GS850 would violently interrupt his lavish engagement party. And the woman stepping off that matte black jet, wrapped in an impenetrable aura of cold, calculating resolve, would not just bring his reputation down, but would bring his entire global empire to its absolute knees. This, they would eventually realize, was not just a quiet divorce, but the controlled detonation that shook the financial world to its core. The atmosphere in the conference room located on the 42nd floor of the Sterling Tower was maintained at a level of chill intended to preserve meat. It was a deliberate signature psychological tactic Marcus Sterling often deployed to destabilize his business rivals, and today, he was employing it ruthlessly on the woman who had been his wife for 5 long years, Elena. Elena sat alone on one side of the massive, custom-built table, looking utterly small against the intimidating scale of the room. She wore a beige cashmere sweater that had clearly seen better days, a subtle statement of her supposed lack of maintenance, and simple, unassuming black slacks. Against the looming backdrop of the Manhattan skyline, gray and imposing through the floor-to-ceiling glass, she seemed almost translucent. Opposite her sat the tribunal. Marcus Sterling, looking immaculately sharp and unforgivably judgmental in a tailored charcoal Tom Ford suit, made a point of refusing to make direct eye contact. He was conspicuously busy checking the time on his Patek Philippe, radiating thinly veiled annoyance that this necessary formality had already consumed more than 10 minutes of his precious schedule. Next to him perched his mother, Beatrix Sterling, a woman whose face was pulled so unnaturally tight by successive layers of plastic surgery that her fixed, practiced smile looked perpetually more like a sharp, predatory snarl. And, of course, their lead counsel, Arthur Penhaligon, a man whose specialty was charging $2,000 an hour to systematically destroy lives, all while maintaining an air of detached civility. "Let's review the terms of the petition one final time, Mrs. Sterling," Arthur purred, his voice dripping with an oily, faux sympathy that scraped on Elena's nerves. "You are agreeing to act as the petitioner. You will formally cite irreconcilable differences. You agree to waive all and any rights to the Sterling Family Trust, including any future claims. You waive all requests for spousal support. Furthermore, you will vacate the Hamptons estate and the Upper East Side penthouse immediately upon signing. In generous exchange, Mr. Sterling agrees to pay you a one-time settlement check of $50,000. Arthur paused dramatically, leaning back slightly, waiting for the anticipated explosion, the inevitable protest that would reveal her true, mercenary colors. $50,000 for 5 years of meticulous service and marriage to a man worth nearly $400 million was not just a lowball figure. It was a targeted, calculated insult. It wasn't even enough capital to cover the rent on a small studio apartment in this city for a single year. It was Beatrix's sadistic idea, naturally. She wanted to see Elena grovel, to literally crawl away penniless. Beatrice leaned forward, the enormous diamonds encrusting her wrist clicking sharply against the polished table surface. "It is a genuinely generous offer, Elena," she asserted, her voice carrying the painful resonance of grinding glass. "Considering you brought absolutely nothing of value into this marriage. No connections, no dowry, no pedigree to speak of. You were, after all, a mere waitress when Marcus had the regrettable lapse in judgment to find you. We are paying you this sum merely to leave quietly. Do not, under any circumstance, get greedy. Marcus finally dragged his gaze up from his watch. His eyes were tired from recent nights of infidelity but hard with unshakable entitlement. Just sign it, Elle. Don't make this tedious or difficult. Chloe is waiting for me right now. We have the engagement photos scheduled for 4 o'clock. Chloe Vanderhoven, the daughter of an incredibly wealthy East Coast shipping magnate. Blonde, artificially bubbly, socially impeccable, and fabulously rich. Everything Beatrice had ever demanded in a daughter-in-law. Marcus had been conducting his affair with her for 6 months with shocking, open carelessness. He hadn't even bothered to be subtle, often leaving receipts from the Plaza Hotel and Cartier carelessly tucked into his jacket pockets for Elena to find, small, cruel confirmations of his disregard. Elena looked down at the documents. The dense legal text blurred slightly, but it was not from tears. It was from a blinding surge of calculated rage. She was thinking back over the last 5 years. She vividly remembered the late nights Marcus had returned home, tears of panic running down his face because the corporate board was threatening to oust him. She remembered systematically rewriting his critical pitch decks for the entire Asian market because his privileged worldview simply couldn't grasp the required cultural nuances. She remembered spending hours soothing Beatrix's fragile ego after the merciless society tabloids mocked her choice of gala dress. Elena had been the invisible, essential glue holding the entire sterling dynamism together, the ghostwriter and the strategic mind, and yet they truly believed she was just an easily discarded waitress. I have one condition, Elena stated softly. Her voice was level, surprisingly calm, causing Arthur to momentarily lose his practiced composure. Beatrice scoffed loudly, leaning back. Here it comes. She wants the house. She wants $1 million. No, Elena said, reaching into her purse. It wasn't a Birkin or even a knockoff. It was just a simple, well-worn leather tote. From it, she pulled out a single Mont Blanc pen. It was the only genuinely expensive item she possessed. A cherished gift from her late father. I don't want the $50,000. The room went completely silent. The hum of the frigid air conditioning system seemed to increase in volume to a loud, persistent whine. Excuse me? Marcus frowned, genuinely perplexed by the deviation from the script. I don't want the money, Elena repeated, fixing her eyes directly on her soon-to-be ex-husband. I want a clean break. I want my name officially removed from all Sterling Enterprises documentation, including the silent partner clauses currently written into the charitable trust. And most importantly, I want the non-disclosure agreement regarding my background, which I assume you will require, to be strictly mutual. She allowed the crucial condition to hang in the cold air. If I can't speak about you or your secrets, you can't speak about me or my origins. Arthur narrowed his eyes, sensing a sophisticated trap, yet unable to pinpoint its precise nature. A mutual NDA was standard protocol in high-profile divorces, yet refusing the settlement money was an act of inexplicable, almost suicidal insanity. You are formally refusing the $50,000 settlement? Arthur pressed, his gold-tipped pen hovering inches above the paper. I don't need your money, Marcus, Elena said, her voice now ringing with a quiet, icy finality. I just want out. Beatrice let out a harsh, barking sound that was meant to be laughter. She's attempting to play the martyr, Marcus. It's a ridiculous, theatrical gesture. But listen, darling, it saves us 50 grand. Write it up, Arthur. Immediately. Elle, you have absolutely nowhere to go, Marcus said, a fleeting flicker of genuine, misplaced pity crossing his face. You don't have a college degree. You haven't held a job in 5 years. Take the money, you need it. I'll be fine, Elena responded simply. Arthur quickly scribbled the amendments, striking out the settlement clause and inserting the mutual NDA provision. He pushed the revised document toward her. Elena didn't hesitate for a second. She didn't spare a glance for the breathtaking Manhattan view. She didn't look again at the man she had once loved enough to leave her own secret world behind. She signed her name, Elena Verrett. She purposefully did not write Sterling. The divorce papers required her legal name, and technically, she was still legally a sterling, but her signature was an unreadable, confident aristocratic scroll she hadn't utilized in half a decade. She capped her pen, tucked it into the tote bag, and stood up. "You have 24 hours to vacate the penthouse entirely," Beatrix snapped, already mentally redesigning the living room. "My bag is already waiting in the lobby," Elena replied calmly. "I won't be returning to the apartment." She turned to leave. At the massive, heavy oak door, she paused and looked back at Marcus. He was already checking his phone, likely sending a preparatory text message to Chloe. "Marcus," she said. He glanced up, annoyed by the interruption. "Be very careful with the Tokyo deal next week," she advised quietly. "The Saitama Group values honor and deep respect over sheer profit. If you use the aggressive, high-leverage strategy Arthur drafted, they will walk away from the table. You will lose everything." Marcus rolled his eyes, a dismissive gesture of superiority. "I think I know how to efficiently run my own company, Elena. Goodbye." Elena merely nodded once, opened the heavy door, and stepped out. As the door clicked shut behind her, Beatrice let out a long theatrical sigh of relief. Finally, the trash has taken itself out. "Now, Marcus, call Chloe immediately. We need to secure the venue for the engagement party. The Vanderhovens are expecting a spectacle, and we must deliver." Marcus sat back, a strange, nagging knot forming deep in his stomach. Usually, he felt the sharp satisfaction of relief when he successfully closed a complicated deal or decisively ended an obligation. This felt profoundly different. It felt inexplicably like he had just willingly sold something incredibly valuable for pennies on the dollar, but he couldn't grasp what exactly that valuable commodity had been. Elena walked out of the Sterling Tower and plunged directly into the overwhelming noise and activity of Fifth Avenue. It was raining, a cold, miserable, gray New York drizzle. She didn't have an umbrella, another subtle sign of her supposed poverty. Most women in her supposedly desperate position would be desperately hailing a grimy cab to a cheap, anonymous motel, carefully counting their newly acquired pennies. Instead, Elena walked 2 deliberate blocks north, turned onto a quiet side street, and stopped directly in front of a blacked-out Range Rover Sentinel that had been idling discreetly there for 20 minutes. The rear door opened silently before she even had a chance to reach for the handle. A man unfolded himself from the vehicle. He was massive, standing at least 6'5", wearing a suit tailored so precisely that it likely cost more than Marcus's daily driver. He held a vast, black umbrella high over Elena's head, instantly shielding her from the relentless rain. "Mademoiselle," the man said, his voice a deep, resonant rumble delivered with a heavy, cultivated French accent. "It is executed." "It's done, Pascal," Elena confirmed, sliding into the leather-lined interior of the armored car. The immediate blast of controlled warmth hit her instantly. The interior smelled distinctly of aged oak and a sophisticated, expensive cologne. A rich, complex scent she hadn't encountered in years, having been subjected to Marcus's cheap, fashionable fragrances. Pascal closed the door with a satisfying, heavy thud and then slid into the driver's seat. He looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. "Does he suspect anything?" "He thinks I'm currently homeless," Elena said, leaning her head back against the plush seat cushion. She closed her eyes for a fleeting moment. The restrictive, boring facade she had meticulously maintained for the past 5 years was finally cracking, falling away like dry mud to reveal the polished, tempered steel beneath. "He believes I'm heading to a women's shelter. Lord Thorne is waiting for you at the private hangar at Teterboro," Pascal announced, smoothly pulling the armored vehicle into the dense traffic, aggressively cutting off a yellow taxi with the casual confidence of someone who knows, indisputably, that they are untouchable. He is, however, displeased. He wanted to come up there himself to witness the signing. If Julian had come up there, he would have thrown Marcus straight out the window on the 42nd floor. Elena countered, a small, tired smile playing briefly on her lips. "I needed to do this myself, Pascal. I desperately needed to see if Marcus had any shred of potential redemption left in him. If he had just shown 1 single ounce of genuine kindness or respect, Perhaps I would have been merciful and warned him about what is coming next. And, Pascal prompted. And he checked his watch? Elena whispered, the exhaustion heavy in her voice. He checked his watch while he divorced me. She pulled a phone out of her tote bag. It wasn't the cracked iPhone 11 Marcus had reluctantly permitted her to use. It was a secure satellite device that Pascal had placed in her bag moments before. She dialed a memorized number. It rang once before being answered. Ella Lenina. The voice on the other end was sharp, commanding, and possessed a distinctly authoritative British cadence. The kind of voice that habitually made prime ministers sit up straighter and listen. "Hello, Julian," she replied. "Are you safe? Is Pascal with you?" "I'm safe. I'm currently en route to Teterboro. Did you sign the documents?" "Yes. No alimony, no financial ties. A mutual NDA as planned." A deep, dark chuckle resonated clearly through the satellite phone. "A mutual NDA. You brilliant girl. That means when the news breaks, and it will be explosive. He cannot sue you for defamation, because the truth, darling, is not defamation. And he absolutely cannot claim ignorance, because he officially signed the waiver releasing the information. You just cleanly stripped him of his only viable defense." "I'm tired, Julian," Elena admitted, her voice breaking just slightly for the first time since she entered the cold conference room. "I just want to go home. The jet is fully fueled. The crew is prepped and waiting. We are heading straight to Monaco tonight." "But, Elena," Julian paused, his tone shifting to strategic anticipation. "The Sterling Gala is scheduled for Saturday, in 2 days' time. The invitation list includes the governor, the entire Vanderhoven clan, and the crucial board of directors." "I know," Elena said, her eyes snapping open. The sadness was completely gone, replaced by a cold, sharp, glittering resolve. "And we are going to attend." "As who?" Julian inquired, though he already knew the profound answer. "Elena Vance is officially dead," she stated, her voice crystalline and unwavering. "She died in that conference room this afternoon." It's time for Elena Valwis to return. Back in the Sterling Tower, the atmosphere was ostensibly celebratory but strangely tense. Marcus was attempting to work, trying to distract himself, but he kept hitting frustrating roadblocks. He opened his laptop to access the Sterling Asia confidential files, specifically the complex strategy documents for the critical Tokyo deal. Access denied, the screen flashed. He frowned deeply, typed the highly complex password again, slowly and precisely. *access denied. "That's exceptionally weird," he muttered, picking up the desk phone and dialing IT support. "This is Marcus. Why in God's name am I locked out of the Tokyo drive?" "One moment, sir." The technician sounded confused and nervous. Sir, that particular drive appears not to exist on our internal servers." "What do you mean it doesn't exist?" "I was literally looking at it yesterday. My wife," he stopped himself abruptly. "Elena used to meticulously organize and manage those specific files. Sir, according to the official logs, those files were never actually hosted on our internal network. They were housed on a private external cloud server. The access key was just globally revoked 10 minutes ago. The user account associated with it was EV Consulting." Marcus froze, the name hitting him like a physical blow. Elena Vance. "Restore it immediately," Marcus barked into the receiver. "We can't, sir. It wasn't our server. We never actually owned that core data. It looked like we did, but it was being mirrored and streamed from an outside source. Whoever owns that source just definitively pulled the plug." Marcus slammed the phone down onto the cradle. "Damn it, Elena." He immediately assumed she had deleted them out of petty spite. It was childish. He could easily rewrite them. He was a Sterling, after all. He didn't need her ridiculously precise notes. Beatrice walked in, holding a flute of champagne, already basking in victory. "Chloe is on her way up. She wants to finalize the floral arrangements for the wedding. She's thinking orchids. I want everyone, especially Chloe's family, to see just how powerful the Sterling family truly is." "Perfect?" Beatrice smiled, a flash of victory in her cold eyes. I'll make absolutely sure the security detail is ready to welcome them. This gala will be the event of the entire decade. It would certainly be the event of the decade, but not for the reasons Beatrix Sterling so confidently imagined. Teterboro Airport, New Jersey, is typically where the global 1% of the population departs from. But the specific private hangar Elena arrived at was meticulously reserved for the exclusive 0.01%. The Range Rover pulled up right onto the freshly oiled tarmac. Sitting there, gleaming ominously under the harsh floodlights, was a Gulfstream G50R. It wasn't painted in the standard corporate white. It was a sophisticated matte black with sharp silver accents. The tail number didn't end in U.S. registration. It was registered, securely, in the Cayman Islands. As Pascal opened her heavy door, a man began descending the air stairs of the jet. Julian Thorne. He was 42, possessed striking salt and pepper hair, eyes the turbulent color of stormy seas, and a jawline that looked as if it had been expertly carved from dense granite. He wore an exquisitely tailored navy suit, but no tie, the top button of his crisp white shirt casually undone. Julian was, by choice, a ghost in the high-stakes financial world. He owned massive global shipping lines, controlled rare earth mines scattered across Africa, and held influential tech firms in Silicon Valley. But you rarely, if ever, saw his name printed in Forbes or the Society pages. He overwhelmingly preferred silent, absolute power over fleeting fame. He had, in fact, been utterly and completely in love with Elena Valwis since they were privileged teenagers attending boarding school together in the Swiss Alps. Elena stepped out of the Range Rover. Julian didn't wait for her to cross the distance. He crossed the tarmac in long, decisive strides and pulled her into a crushing, enveloping embrace that felt like coming home after a terrible war. He smelled comfortingly of rain and the rich, dark warmth of sandalwood. "I've got you, Elenina," he whispered fiercely into her hair. "I've got you now." Elena finally allowed herself to let go. The tears she had rigorously held back in the lawyer's office now flowed freely, soaking into the shoulder of his expensive shirt. "I feel so unbelievably stupid, Julian. I tried so agonizingly hard to be normal, to force myself to live a simple, ordinary life. You fell in love, Elle. There is no inherent shame in that kind of mistake," Julian countered, pulling back slightly and cupping her face tenderly. "But you fell in love with a profoundly vain man who loves himself more than anything else in the entire world. That, my dear, is solely his failure, not yours. He treated me like nothing more than a servant," she said, her voice hardening with the memory. "And his mother treated me like an unwelcome stray dog." "And on Saturday," Julian said, his storm-colored eyes darkening with a clear, dangerous promise, "we are going to remind them that stray dogs often have wolves for ancestors." They walked up the stairs and into the waiting Gulfstream. The interior was unlike anything Marcus had ever flown in. It was designed less like a plane and more like a minimalist penthouse, featuring cream leather, custom gold fixtures, a full private bedroom, and a separate corporate conference area. As the jet taxied smoothly toward the runway, Elena sat by the panoramic window, watching the glittering, vast lights of New York City slowly fade away into the distance. "Drink," Julian offered, pouring a generous glass of vintage Dom Perignon. "Julian," Elena said, ignoring the offered champagne flute. "The Tokyo deal. Marcus is definitely going to ruin it. Let him." "It's not your problem anymore," Julian said, sitting across from her, his expression relaxed. "No, you don't understand the full scope of the deal. If the acquisition falls through, as I suspect it will, 3,000 workers in the manufacturing plant in Ohio immediately lose their jobs. Marcus leveraged the employee pension fund to finance the acquisition. If he fails, he doesn't just lose money. Innocent, good people lose absolutely everything they have worked for." Julian studied her face intently. Even now, after enduring everything Marcus had done to minimize and betray her, she was still primarily worrying about the factory workers' livelihoods. This moral compass, this innate sense of responsibility, was precisely why she was the rightful, undisputed head of the Valwis dynasty. "So, what exactly do you want to do about it?" Julian asked. "I want to buy the debt," Elena declared, a faint echo of the Valwis authority in her voice. Julian raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. You want to buy Sterling Enterprises debt? The company is massive. I want to buy the specific high-risk loan Marcus took out for the Tokyo deal. I want to personally own the note. She leaned forward, the strategist emerging fully. When he defaults, and he will default without my strategy, I want to be the one holding the leash around his neck. Julian smiled then. It was a purely predatory smile, acknowledging the brilliance of the move. That particular note will cost you approximately $300 million. Elena reached back into her simple leather tote bag and pulled out a small, heavy velvet pouch. She tipped it over onto the gleaming table. A ring slid out. It wasn't the traditional wedding band she had discarded. It was a formidable signet ring, heavy gold, bearing the ancient, distinct crest of a phoenix rising dramatically from flames. The Valwis crest. My trust fund fully unlocks the moment I am legally divorced, Elena stated flatly. I have full access to the family liquidity as of... She checked her new, secure watch. 10 minutes ago. Julian laughed then. A genuine, hearty sound of pure delight. God, I missed you, Elena Valwis. Keep your money. I'll personally buy the debt through a newly formed shell company tomorrow morning. Consider it a welcome-back present to your real life. Thank you, she said, relief washing over her. Now, Julian leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. Let's talk about Saturday. The gala. You need a dress. And not just any dress. You need a verifiable weapon. Elena smiled for the first time in months. A real, powerful smile that promised retribution. I already made the call. Donatella Versace is meeting us in Monaco. The morning sun over the French Riviera hit the massive terrace of the Villa Leopolda like a perfectly positioned spotlight. It was one of the single most expensive private residences in the world, perched imperiously on the hills of Villefranche-sur-Mer, overlooking the azure sweep of the Mediterranean Sea. Julian Thorne didn't merely rent it, he owned it outright. Elena stood on the sun-drenched balcony, wrapped loosely in a silk robe that cost significantly more than the insulting settlement check Marcus had offered her. The salty, clean air filled her lungs, completely clearing out the stale, recycled atmosphere of the Sterling Tower. For 5 long years, she had felt profoundly suffocated. Today she could finally breathe again. Inside the grand salon, the atmosphere was frantic but meticulously controlled. Racks of clothing lined the historic walls, Chanel, Dior, McQueen. But the true centerpiece was a dress form standing in the middle of the room, attended to by 3 focused seamstresses and a woman with iconic, unmistakable platinum blonde hair. Too tight in the waist, Donatella Versace declared, her voice raspy and immediately authoritative. She needs to breathe easily, but she also needs to absolutely destroy him visually. It is a very fine line we must walk. Elena stepped back inside from the terrace. Donatella, it is truly beautiful. It is not just beautiful, Cara, the designer corrected, turning to face Elena. It is armor. Julian told me the entire story. This man, this Sterling, he tried to make you invisible to the world, so we make you utterly impossible to miss. Elena ran her hand slowly over the rich fabric. It was a custom creation, a deep midnight blue velvet that seemed to possess the ability to absorb the light around it, making her presence even more striking. It was embellished with thousands of tiny, crushed sapphires along the intricate neckline, and featured a slit that went dangerously, breathtakingly high up the thigh. It was elegant, undeniably regal, and utterly terrifying in its projection of power. Julian walked in holding a slender tablet. He was wearing relaxed linen trousers and a crisp white shirt, looking every bit the uncontested master of this extraordinary domain. The debt acquisition is complete, Julian announced calmly, sipping his espresso. Elena turned, her eyes wide with shock. Already? It was remarkably easy, Julian explained, swirling the dark liquid in his cup. Marcus financed the Tokyo expansion through a high-risk mezzanine loan from a notoriously jumpy private equity firm in Zurich. The firm was already extremely nervous about the mounting rumors of his divorce. They knew you were universally considered the brains behind the operation. When my shell company, Phoenix Holdings, offered to buy the debt at par value, they practically threw the papers at me. So, you own him now? Elena whispered, the profound realization settling over her. Technically, we own him, Julian corrected gently. I put the holding company in your name, Elena. You are now officially the creditor. If Marcus misses a single covenant requirement, which he absolutely will because he never bothers to read the fine print, you have the immediate legal right to call the entire loan. That is $300 million due within 24 hours. He doesn't have the liquidity to cover that, Elena whispered, pale. He spent it all on the Hamptons renovation and the ridiculously large ring for Chloe. Exactly? Julian smiled, completely devoid of mercy. He would be immediately forced to liquidate his personal assets, the penthouse, the yacht, his controlling company shares. You hold the axe, Elena. You simply have to decide when and where to swing it. Elena looked at the powerful dress, then back at Julian. For years, she had felt acutely powerless. Marcus had controlled the credit cards, the keys to the house, the social calendar. He had successfully made her feel like a perpetual, awkward guest in her own marriage. Now, she held the legal deed to his entire existence. Not yet, Elena said, her voice entirely still. If I call the loan immediately, it's just business, a simple financial maneuver. He'll find a way to spin it. He'll convince the world it was just a typical market downturn. Say he was a victim of a hostile takeover. I want him to know it was personal. I want him to look me in the eye when his world crumbles. Then we stick strictly to the plan for the gala, Julian stated, his voice low and firm. We arrive late. We disrupt her carefully orchestrated entrance. We make him panic, and when he inevitably makes a mistake, you strike. Later that evening, Elena sat before a wide vanity mirror backstage in the hangar, a stylist meticulously working on her hair. She had cut it drastically. The long, sensible brown waves that Marcus had praised because they made her look reliably maternal were gone. Her reflection now showed a sharp, severe angled bob, dyed a rich, dark espresso color that caught the light like polished lacquer. It dramatically highlighted the fine structure of her cheekbones and gave her eyes a piercing intensity. She applied a final, deliberate coat of blood-red lipstick, a color that spoke of war and ownership. Julian appeared in the doorway, framed perfectly. He was dressed in a tailored midnight blue tuxedo that fit his frame with lethal precision, appearing less like clothing and more like a second, protective skin. He paused for a long moment, simply staring at her transformation. You look like a queen prepared for conquest, he finally said, his voice husky. I feel like one, Elena replied, testing the weight of the new persona. She stood up, the midnight blue velvet dress cascading around her like flowing ink. She reached for a necklace lying on a velvet tray, a magnificent choker of intricately set diamonds and deep blue sapphires that had once been the prized possession of her grandmother, the Countess of Valwis. She hadn't dared wear it since the day of her father's funeral. Pascal has the jet ready, Julian said, offering her his arm with courtly respect. It's a 7-hour flight to New York. We will land precisely as the speeches are scheduled to begin. Elena took his arm. Her hand was steady, utterly devoid of tremor. Let's go crash a wedding, she said. The Sterling estate in the Hamptons was a monument designed purely to intimidate. It was a sprawling 20-acre compound of unearned wealth, featuring hyper-manicured lawns that bled into a private stretch of beach, and a main house that was a breathtakingly hollow imitation of Versailles, all gilt and hubris cast in stone. Tonight, the entire complex was excessively lit, resembling an opulent, exclusive carnival. 300 guests, the absolute who's who of New York society, milled across the turf. Power-broking senators, volatile tech moguls, granite-faced old money families, and the usual eager social climbers, all smelling faintly of expensive ambition. Massive white tents had been erected near the ocean to shield the delicate guests from the evening wind, filled with towers of shimmering seafood, elaborate fountains dispensing vintage champagne, and thousands upon thousands of pristine white orchids. Chloe's non-negotiable demand for floral purity. Marcus stood near the elevated stage, swirling his scotch. He was already working on his third, but the liquor offered no comfort. He should have been deliriously happy. He was legally free, stupendously rich, and about to marry a Vanderhoven, cementing his place in the social stratosphere. Yet, beneath the veneer of triumph, he felt a nauseating, insistent sense of dread, like a loose stone rolling down a well. "Smile, darling," Chloe chirped, materializing suddenly at his side. She was wearing a pink ruffled dress that truly looked like a confectionery explosion, loud, ridiculously expensive, and lacking any hint of genuine subtlety or taste. "The photographer from Vogue is here, darling. We need to look authentically ecstatic." "I am happy," Marcus lied, wrenching a forced, brittle grin onto his face. "Did you hear?" Chloe whispered loudly enough for 3 people nearby to catch the gossip. "Arthur told me Elena actually signed the papers. No fight, no drama. I told you she was weak. She probably went back to whatever trailer park she crawled out of." Marcus flinched visibly. "She didn't crawl out of a trailer park, Chloe. Oh, stop defending her. She's history. Tonight is about us." Beatrick swept over, looking fiercely triumphant in a gown of shimmering gold lame. "Marcus, the governor is asking for you, and the investors from Dubai just arrived. They are very impressed with the setup. This engagement is the best PR move you've ever made." "Is the security ironclad?" Marcus asked, scanning the perimeter nervously, his mind unable to shake the sense of instability. "I don't want any gutter press crashing this." "Please," Beatrick scoffed, waving a dismissive hand encased in diamond bracelets. "We have former Mossad at the gates. A common field mouse couldn't get in without a proper invitation." At that very moment, a low, visceral rumble began to vibrate through the ground. It started as a distant hum, a faint mosquito buzz, then rapidly escalated into a deafening roar that swallowed the delicate strains of the string quartet playing Vivaldi's Four Seasons. The 300 guests looked up, shielding their eyes against the glare of the quickly setting sun, their faces shifting from confusion to annoyance. "What is that?" Chloe shrieked, clutching the pearls at her throat as if they might physically protect her. A massive, ominous shadow swept over the party, instantly extinguishing the celebratory mood. A Gulfstream G650R, painted a menacing matte black with razor-sharp silver wingtips, was descending, coming in dangerously low. It roared over the estate at barely 500 feet, the engine screaming with raw, untamed power. The sheer displacement of air from its wake rattled the champagne glasses violently, sent linen napkins spiraling high into the air, and flattened Chloe's intricate hairdo. "What the hell is that pilot doing?" Marcus shouted over the din, spilling his third scotch onto the pristine stone patio. The jet banked sharply, heading toward the private airstrip that bordered the Sterling estate. A strip Marcus rarely used because his own, smaller jet didn't require such length. "That's a heavy jet," a man next to Marcus muttered, an obsessive aviation enthusiast whose eyes were wide with a mix of terror and awe. "That's a $65 million bird. Who do you know that owns that kind of hardware?" Marcus didn't answer. He watched, utterly paralyzed, as the sleek machine kissed the ground on the private strip about a mile away, yet clearly visible across the flat, open expanse of the lawn. The party had ground to a complete halt. The forgotten speeches, the champagne toasts, everything stopped. All eyes were fixed on the black predator as it slowly taxied to a halt at the edge of the property, precisely where the private access road met the party grounds. "Ignore it," Beatrick commanded, trying desperately to reassert control. "Probably just some rude, terribly late arrival. Orchestra, keep playing." But nobody was listening to the string quartet. A convoy of 3 identical, intimidating black SUVs, which had clearly been waiting patiently at the perimeter gates, raced toward the grounded jet. The airplane's stairs lowered with a dramatic hiss. A few moments later, the same 3 SUVs drove back toward the party entrance with determined speed. The security guards, the former Mossad, stepped forward to halt them, but the lead SUV didn't slow. The tinted window rolled down, and a badge was flashed. Not a press pass, but something official, something demanding immediate deference. The heavy iron gates swung open instantly. "Who is that?" Chloe whined, mortified. "They are absolutely ruining my entrance." The SUVs pulled up right to the very edge of the red carpet. The music died down completely, the final notes dissolving into the thick evening air. The resulting silence was heavy, oppressive, filled only by the distant, rhythmic sound of the ocean and the low, throbbing idle of the powerful engines. The driver of the lead car stepped out. It was Pascal. He looked even more massive and imposing in the razor-sharp cut of his tuxedo. He walked with silent purpose around to the rear passenger door and opened it. First, a cane emerged. A sleek, black ebony cane with a silver handle shaped like the cruel, predatory head of a wolf. Then Julian Thorne stepped out. A collective, profound gasp rippled through the crowd, like a sudden release of shared breath. Julian Thorne was a legend, a verifiable myth in their circles. He never attended social events. He was the silent man who ate corporate competitors for breakfast and washed it down with their stock certificates. "Is that Julian Thorne?" The governor whispered urgently to his aide, his voice trembling slightly. "I've been trying to get a private meeting with that man for 2 years." Julian stood by the open door, ignoring the crowd, and held out his hand with perfect, unwavering poise. A woman's leg appeared. A stiletto heel, the midnight blue velvet matching the dress, clicked onto the pavement. Elena Valwis rose from the car. The silence shattered. 100 whispers erupted at once. A flurry of shocked gasps and frantic questions. "Is that? No, it can't be. Look at that dress. Is that Elena Sterling?" She stood tall, the midnight blue velvet hugging her curves like a second skin, the sapphires on her throat catching the floodlights like gathered stars. Her dark, sharp bob was immaculate, and her blood-red lips curved in a mysterious, utterly unbothered smile. She didn't look like the woman who had organized charity bake sales. She looked like a deity of cold vengeance made manifest. Marcus felt the blood drain entirely from his face, leaving him pale and sickened. He dropped his glass of scotch. It shattered on the expensive stone patio, but the sound was utterly lost in the commotion. "Elena!" he choked out, the name a ragged whisper. Beatrick marched forward, her face instantly turning a violent shade of enraged crimson. "This is a private event. Security, remove this trespasser." 2 uniformed security guards hesitated for a moment, then cautiously stepped toward Elena. Pascal moved instantly, stepping in front of them and crossing his massive arms over his chest. He didn't say a single word. He simply stared, his gaze radiating silent, contained threat. The guards stopped, sensing intuitively that moving forward would result in immediate, catastrophic bodily harm. Elena gently placed a hand on Pascal's granite-like arm, lowering it slightly. She looked past the stunned guards, past the sputtering Beatrick, locking her eyes directly with Marcus's. "Beatrick," Elena said, her voice projecting clearly and calmly across the silent lawn, amplified by the sudden attention. "There is no need for a scene. We aren't crashing." She reached into a small, diamond-encrusted clutch bag and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. "We received an invitation," she stated, holding it up for the nearby crowd to see. "Addressed specifically to the occupant of the penthouse. Since the deed to the penthouse hasn't technically cleared the county clerk's office until Monday, I believe that occupant is still me." It was a cold, infuriating technicality, a cruel loophole. Beatrick had sent mass invites to all their corporate properties for staff distribution, never remotely imagining that the former wife would utilize such a bureaucratic flaw. Julian stepped up smoothly beside her, placing a possessive, territorial hand on the small of her back. He surveyed the stunned crowd, his eyes cold, amused, and utterly victorious. "Good evening," Julian said, his voice smooth and rich, drawing the attention of every VIP. "I hope we aren't terribly late. Elena was insisting we make an unscheduled stop in Monaco to pick up something suitable to wear. You know how she is about standards." The governor pushed impatiently past Marcus, his priorities shifting instantly. "Julian, Julian Thorne. My goodness. What an astounding surprise. Julian nodded, shaking the politician's hand briefly, but his focus immediately returned to Elena. Governor, have you met my partner? I believe you know Elena, but perhaps not this version of her. The crowd parted instinctively as Elena and Julian began their walk up the red carpet. They did not walk like ordinary guests hoping to be seen. They walked like they owned the very ground beneath their feet. Marcus stood completely frozen. Chloe was pulling frantically at his arm, hissing like an angry cat. Do something. She's wearing Versace. That's my designer. Elena stopped 3 feet from Marcus. She smelled intensely of outrageously expensive perfume and ozone, a lingering scent of the jet engine and high altitude. She looked him up and down, her expression one of mild, detached amusement, exactly as one might look at a naughty child who had just spilled milk on the Persian rug. Hello, Marcus, she said, her voice soft but carrying. Lovely party. The orchids are a bit excessive, don't you think? But then again, subtlety was never your strong suit. What are you doing here? Marcus hissed, his voice trembling uncontrollably. I paid you to leave. Elena leaned in close, ensuring that only he could hear the fatal pronouncement. You paid Elena Vance to leave, Marcus. She's gone. You are dealing with Elena Valwis now, and you really should have checked who bought your Tokyo debt this morning. She pulled back, delivered a sharp, mocking wink, and walked calmly past him toward the raw bar, Julian permanently at her side. Marcus felt his phone vibrate violently in his pocket. He pulled it out with shaking hands. It was a text from his CFO. *alert. Change of ownership in the mezzanine loan structure. New creditor is Phoenix Holdings. They just flagged a covenant breach. They are calling the full amount. $300 million meta due tomorrow. Marcus looked up at Elena, who was now laughing softly at something the governor said. A crystal glass of champagne resting lightly in her hand. The trap hadn't just sprung closed. It had efficiently snapped his financial neck. The engagement party had transformed, in less than 5 minutes, from a coronation into a wake. The string quartet, finally recovering, was playing a cheerful, oblivious waltz, but the tension hanging over the lawn was so thick it was physically choking. Marcus Sterling stood near the massive ice sculpture of a swan, clutching his phone to his ear like a final, desperate lifeline. He was sweating profusely despite the cool ocean breeze whipping around him. On the other end of the line was his chief financial officer, a man who usually spoke in calm, measured tones, now sounding on the absolute verge of a full-blown panic attack. What do you mean, immediate repayment? Marcus hissed, desperately turning his back to the curious guests. It's a 30-year loan. It was a 30-year loan, sir. The CFO stammered, the line crackling. But there's a change of control clause and a material adverse change clause buried deep in the fine print. The new creditor, Phoenix Holdings, they invoked them both. They claim your divorce settlement significantly altered your liquidity ratios. Marcus, they've frozen the operating accounts. We can't even make payroll on Friday. Marcus looked across the glittering lawn. Elena was holding court near the raw seafood bar, radiating confidence. She was laughing softly at something the governor had said, her hand resting lightly on Julian Thorne's arm. She looked radiant, impossibly powerful, and utterly untouchable. He slammed the phone shut and marched toward her, his mind a red haze. He didn't care about the guests anymore. He didn't care about the optics or the photographers. He was a drowning man, and she was the relentless, unforgiving ocean. Elena! He barked, brutally interrupting the governor mid-sentence. The surrounding circle of high society elites fell silent, anticipating the spectacle. Julian turned slowly, his expression shifting to one of bored irritation, like a magnificent lion disturbed by a petty, buzzing fly. Marcus, Elena said, her voice cool, pleasant, and entirely controlled. I believe you are interrupting the governor. I don't care, Marcus snapped, his face flushed scarlet with humiliation. We need to talk now, in private. I have nothing to say to you in private, Marcus, Elena replied, taking a deliberate sip of her champagne. My lawyer, Arthur. made that very clear. Or rather, your lawyer did. You bought the debt, Marcus accused, his voice soaring higher in pitch. You used some shell company to buy the Tokyo loan. That's insider trading. That's fraud. Actually, Julian interjected smoothly, without raising his voice. It's perfectly legal distressed asset acquisition. Elena simply saw a demonstrably bad investment, made worse by incompetent management, and decided to correct it. You're trying to bankrupt me, Marcus shouted, losing all composure. The orchestra stopped playing mid-note. Every head turned toward the central confrontation. Chloe Vanderhoven, sensing the sudden, drastic shift in power and financial viability, took a subtle but discernible step away from her fiancé. Elena calmly handed her champagne glass to a passing waiter. She stepped forward, the midnight blue velvet of her gown swirling elegantly around her legs. She did not look up at Marcus. She looked chillingly through him. I am not trying to bankrupt you, Marcus. You accomplished that entirely on your own, she said, her voice carrying clear and cold across the silent crowd. You leveraged the company to the hilt to buy a yacht you didn't need, and a diamond ring for a woman who clearly doesn't love you. You fired the 3 most senior, brilliant engineers in the Ohio plant to cut costs, ruining product quality control. You utterly ignored the sacred cultural protocols of the Saitama Group, insulting them to their faces. She paused, her eyes flashing with focused intensity. I didn't buy the debt to destroy the company. I bought it to save it from you. Beatrice Sterling forced her way through the throng, her face a rigid mask of incoherent fury. How dare you? You ungrateful little gutter rat. After everything we gave you. She lunged forward. Security, get her out of here. She raised her hand, intending to physically strike Elena. A desperate, vulgar, and utterly classless move. But the hand never connected. Pascal moved with startling speed, faster than a man of his size should be capable of. He caught Beatrix's wrist in midair, holding it in a vice-like grip of iron. He didn't squeeze or hurt her, but he didn't let go. I would not recommend that, madam, Pascal rumbled, his voice a low, gravelly threat. Elena looked at her former mother-in-law with an expression bordering on pity. Let her go, Pascal. She's not a threat. She's just a relic. Pascal instantly released Beatrice, who stumbled back, gasping in shock and indignation. Elena turned back to Marcus, the final formality complete. Here is the situation, Marcus. Phoenix Holdings officially owns the note. You have defaulted on the covenant. As of tomorrow morning, I am exercising my right to convert the debt into equity. Marcus's eyes widened in profound horror. Equity? You can't. Read the contract, Elena mandated coolly. In the event of a default, the creditor has the contractual option to seize controlling shares equivalent to the debt value. Since you owe $300 million and the company's stock has plummeted 20% since news of your erratic behavior leaked, that gives me 51%. The math hit him with the force of a physical blow. 51%. You're taking my company, he whispered, the sound raw and broken. I'm taking my company, Elena corrected him sharply. The company I built while you were perpetually playing golf. The company I saved while you were cheating. She then addressed the stunned crowd around them, effortlessly regaining command of the space. I sincerely apologize for the disruption. Everyone, please enjoy the party. I believe the bar is still open, though I cannot promise the host can afford the final tab. She turned to leave, Julian smoothly guiding her, but the final, sharpest knife twist came from Chloe. The blonde socialite looked at Marcus, then frantically checked the text messages on her own phone from her father, warning her in stark terms to distance herself immediately from the inevitable Sterling crash. Marcus, Chloe said, her voice thin and shrill with panic. Is this true? Are you truly broke? Chloe, it's just a setback. I can fix it. Marcus pleaded, reaching desperately for her arm. Don't touch me, she recoiled violently. She wrenched the massive diamond ring, the ring purchased with the company's dwindling liquidity, off her finger and threw it savagely at his chest. I am not marrying a failure. My father warned me about you. Chloe stormed off toward the valet stand, scrambling for the nearest escape. Marcus stood utterly alone in the center of the manicured lawn. His mother was sobbing hysterically near the orchid towers. His fiancée was gone. His company was gone. And the woman he had discarded like useless trash was walking toward a $65 million jet, hand in hand with a better man. Elena didn't look back. She didn't need to. The morning edition of the Wall Street Journal sat exactly in the center of the polished glass conference table. The headline was bold, unforgiving, and utterly impossible to ignore. Asterisk the silent coup. How socialite Elena Valwis toppled the Sterling Empire in 21 days. Asterisk the accompanying article detailed every clandestine step. It tracked the secret acquisition of the Tokyo debt, analyzed the triggering change of control clauses that had led to the devastating default, and even featured a sidebar speculating on the fiery new romance between the mysterious heiress and the notoriously reclusive billionaire Julian Thorne. But inside the boardroom on the 42nd floor of the Sterling Tower, the mood was far from sensational. It was terminal. Marcus Sterling sat hunched at the far end of the long table, the seat of the defeated. 3 weeks ago, he had been the undisputed king of New York finance. He had a fiancée, a 9-figure net worth, and a formidable mother who controlled the social registry. Today, he was profoundly alone. He looked terrible, physically diminished. The charcoal Tom Ford suit he wore was the same one he'd worn yesterday. His tie was loosened and askew, and his eyes were heavily rimmed with red. He hadn't slept a true night since the gala. His phone, which usually buzzed relentlessly with lucrative deal offers and party invitations, had been utterly silent for days, save for the incessant calls from increasingly aggressive creditors. Beatrice, his mother, had fled almost immediately to her sister's villa in Tuscany the moment her corporate credit card stopped working, leaving Marcus to face the firing squad alone. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom opened, and the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The air, previously stale and heavy with the scent of defeat, seemed to charge sharply with cold electricity. Elena walked in. She wasn't wearing the soft, forgiving beige sweaters of her marriage. She was wearing a structured, flawless white power suit by Alexander McQueen, tailored to razor-sharp perfection. Her newly dark hair was slicked back severely, revealing large diamond studs in her ears. She didn't look like a woman who had just finalized a bitter divorce. She looked like a CEO who had just successfully engineered a billion-dollar merger. To her right walked Julian Thorne, radiating a calm, predatory confidence in his navy suit, unbuttoned at the collar. To her left walked Arthur Penhaligon. Marcus flinched hard when he saw Arthur, his own former lawyer, the man who had drafted the insulting $50,000 divorce settlement just weeks prior. "Arthur," Marcus croaked, his voice cracking painfully. "You're representing her?" Arthur didn't spare Marcus even a glance. He pulled out the chair at the head of the table for Elena. "I represent the majority shareholder, Marcus. My allegiance is to the company, and as of 8 a.m. this morning, that is indisputably Ms. Valwis." Elena sat down in the executive chair, Marcus's old seat. She placed her hands flat on the mahogany surface, the very same table where she had signed her life away less than a month ago. "Good morning, Marcus," she said. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. It wasn't angry, and it wasn't bitter. It was the voice of a surgeon about to make a swift, necessary incision. "You can't do this," Marcus whispered, though he knew with sickening certainty she already had. "The board won't approve it." "The board has already approved it," Julian said, taking the seat immediately next to Elena. He slid a thick dossier across the highly polished wood. "We held an emergency vote at 6 a.m. Since Phoenix Holdings converted the debt into equity, Elena now controls 51% of the voting stock. The board serves her now." Marcus stared blankly at the dossier. "So that's it? You're just going to fire me from my own company?" "No," Elena said, giving him a flicker of false hope. "I'm not firing you." Marcus looked up, a tiny, desperate light appearing in his red-rimmed eyes. "I'm erasing you," she finished, her gaze merciless. She opened the folder in front of her. "We are rebranding. Sterling Enterprises is a damaged, toxic name. The market currently associates it with volatility, poor judgment, and highly publicized failed engagements. As of noon today, the ticker on the NYSE will officially change to Valwis Global. Your name is coming off the building, Marcus. Is coming off the letterhead. Is coming off the corporate trust. Elena, please. Marcus leaned forward, raw desperation seeping into his tone. I built this. No. Elena corrected him sharply, stopping him mid-plea. Your grandfather built it. You inherited it. And I saved it. She picked up a separate document. Let's review the state of things. When I took over the books 3 weeks ago, the company was hemorrhaging cash. You had leveraged the employee pension fund to pay for that grotesque Hamptons renovation. You had fundamentally alienated the Saitama Group in Tokyo. You were days away from a federal investigation for egregious misuse of funds. She paused, letting the full, terrible weight of his failures settle heavily in the quiet room. In the last 20 days, I have rehired the engineers you fired. I have personally apologized to the Saitama representatives in fluent Japanese, by the way, a language I learned while you were out partying. They have re-signed the key contract. The stock price has rebounded 12% since the announcement that I was taking the helm. Marcus slumped back in his chair. He looked small. The towering arrogance that had defined Marcus Sterling for the better part of a decade had utterly evaporated, leaving behind a pallid, frightened boy slumped in the leather chair. What happens to me? He managed to croak, the sound barely audible in the cavernous room. That, Marcus? Elena replied, her voice cool and lethal. Depends entirely on how you conduct yourself over the next 5 minutes. She didn't look at him as she gave a curt signal to Arthur. The lawyer, impassive, slid a single sheet of heavily watermarked paper across the polished mahogany toward Marcus. You still hold 12% of the B shares, Elena explained, leaning slightly forward, her gaze piercing. They are non-voting, yes, but they exist. I do not want you on my capitalization table, Marcus. I want a surgically clean break. This is a buyout offer, Arthur stated, his tone clinically professional, confirming the corporate execution underway. Marcus's gaze dropped to the specified sum, the number. His eyes widened, fixing on the 8 digits. 10 million. The stake is worth 100 million on paper, Marcus protested, grasping at the last thread of his former status. On paper? Exactly. Julian interjected smoothly from his position by the window, reinforcing the ruthless synergy between him and Elena. If you refuse this offer, we will proceed with a massive dilution. We will issue new, comprehensive stock options for every single employee who stayed loyal through your erratic tenure. By Christmas, that 12% minority stake will be worth less than the ink used to print your name on that page. Julian paused, letting the threat sink in. Furthermore, Marcus, we are intimately aware of your personal balance sheet. The 6-carat engagement ring purchase, the down payment on the Mediterranean yacht, you owe the banks 15 million personally. You are quite spectacularly underwater. This, Julian concluded, tapping the air once, is a checkmate. A brutal, final, inescapable checkmate. If you sign this document, Elena cut back in, her voice becoming slightly more merciful, though still firm. You receive $10 million. It's enough to zero out the banks, maintain the Fifth Avenue penthouse for now, and simply vanish. You can live a quiet life of luxury, go to Europe or Asia or anywhere you choose. You can do whatever you want, provided it is not here. Marcus slowly picked up the bespoke silver pen. His hand was trembling so violently that the fine tip tapped a rapid, frantic rhythm against the smooth surface of the paper. He lifted his gaze, meeting Elena's one last time. He searched her face, desperate for a glimpse of the woman he had married, the woman who had quietly made him tea when he was sick, the loyal listener who had patiently absorbed his endless rants about his overbearing mother. Elle, he whispered, using the pet name he hadn't spoken in years. Did you ever really love me? Or was this whole marriage just one long, elaborate con? Were you always this, wolf? Elena's meticulously maintained composure softened, just for a fleeting fraction of a second. The steely facade cracked, allowing a glimpse of the deep, wounded human beneath. I loved you more than I loved myself, Marcus, she said, the softness in her tone like a sudden blade. I signed that prenup 5 years ago with a genuine smile because I believed in us. I worked for you in the shadows. I silently took your mother's cruel abuse. I made myself intentionally small so that you could perpetually feel big. She leaned forward, the fleeting warmth vanishing as her eyes hardened into polished, unforgiving diamonds. But you didn't want a partner, Marcus. You didn't want a co-pilot. You only wanted a fan. She paused, her voice dropping to a dangerous register. And when you grew bored, you attempted to dispose of me like a soiled napkin. You forgot the most dangerous thing about me, Marcus. The single defining factor. What? He breathed. I am a Valois. She pronounced the name like a challenge. We do not break. We burn, and then we rise from the ashes, stronger. Marcus dropped his eyes. He didn't hesitate this time. He scribbled his signature across the document. Marcus Sterling. It was done. It was over. He pushed himself out of the chair, leaving the signed paper and the check for $10 million on the table for Arthur to handle. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, and echoed unnaturally loud in the vast, suddenly silent boardroom. He reached the threshold and paused, turning back one last time. He looked across the expanse of glass at the dizzying view of the city, the concrete and steel landscape he had genuinely believed he owned, sculpted by his ambition. Then, without a sound, he walked out, closing the heavy oak door not just on the room, but on the entirety of his legacy. The silence that settled in the aftermath was profound. It was not the oppressive, agonizing silence of anticipation. It was the liberating silence of a battlefield where the smoke has cleared and the war has been decisively won. Well, Julian finally murmured, effortlessly breaking the monumental tension. He stood, moving toward the panoramic window, surveying the defiant Manhattan skyline. That went significantly better than I anticipated. I genuinely thought he might collapse and weep. He wanted to, Elena admitted. Letting out a massive, shuddering breath, she realized she had been unknowingly holding hostage for 5 long years. She sank slightly deeper into the leather of her chair, the powerful surge of adrenaline beginning its inevitable, exhausting descent. Arthur rose, meticulously smoothing the lapels of his tailored jacket. I will file the official transfer papers with the Securities and Exchange Commission immediately, Miss Valois. Congratulations. You officially hold the controlling interest in Sterling Enterprises. Thank you, Arthur, Elena replied, already focusing on the future. And Arthur, one more thing? Yes, Miss Valois? Please draft a substantial bonus package for the entire engineering team in Ohio. They stuck with us through the worst of the uncertainty and the legal battles. I want them to know, explicitly, that loyalty is not only recognized but richly rewarded here. Arthur actually smiled, a rare, completely genuine upward curve of the mouth. I will see to it personally. He gave a slight nod and departed the room. Elena stood, finding her legs unsteady for a moment, and walked to the window, finally standing beside Julian. The city view had fundamentally changed. Before the confrontation, the panorama of glass and steel had felt like a suffocating cage built by Marcus. Now it resembled a complex, multidimensional puzzle that she, the true strategist, had finally and utterly solved. Julian turned to her. He didn't move to embrace her. Not yet. He simply looked at her with an intense, proprietary gaze that made the last vestiges of her strength drain away, leaving her knees weak. You were magnificent, he stated, his voice a low, steady rumble of approval. I was terrified, she confessed quietly, letting the vulnerability show for the first time. When he looked at me, I saw the ghost of myself, the scared little waitress from years ago. I felt like I didn't belong here. Julian reached out, covering her hand with his own, running his thumb slowly over her fragile knuckles. You didn't take this company because of the Valois name, Elena. You took it because you were and are the only one in this room or any room smart enough, resilient enough to run it. You belong here. You always have. Elena looked at the man who had waited patiently in the wings for her, the silent partner who had provided the tactical blueprint but steadfastly allowed her to wield the final weapon herself. A genuine, small smile touched the corners of her mouth. "I am currently the chief executive officer of a multinational conglomerate," she announced. "And my calendar is miraculously open for the next 48 hours. Julian Thorne, what precisely do billionaires do on their days off?" Julian glanced down at his wrist, checking the time on a vintage Rolex. Understated, weighty, and entirely timeless. "Well, the Gulfstream G650 is fueled and waiting on the tarmac at Teterboro," Julian responded, the detail effortless. "The flight plan is filed for the Amalfi Coast. I happen to know that Lu Sirenius in Positano has the single best private terrace for watching the Mediterranean sunset. And I promised you," he concluded, his eyes twinkling, "a real honeymoon." "A honeymoon?" Elena lifted a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, challenging him lightly. "We aren't married yet, Julian." Julian reached into the inner pocket of his blazer. He did not produce a velvet ring box. That moment, she knew, was reserved for the magic of Positano. Instead, he pulled out 2 deep blue passports. "Not yet," he agreed with a charming smile. "But a man is permitted to dream of the future, isn't he? Shall we depart?" Elena accepted the passport he offered. She scanned the opulent boardroom one last, comprehensive time. In the shadowy corner, she saw the faint ghost of the terrified, silent girl she had been 5 years earlier. She mentally acknowledged that girl, giving her a gentle, internal wave of farewell. "Let's go," she stated, her voice full of anticipation. They walked out of the office hand in hand, a picture of effortless, quiet power. As they passed the sleek reception desk, a maintenance worker was already up on a ladder, methodically unscrewing the heavy brass letters that spelled out Sterling Enterprises from the marble wall. Elena did not glance back. She stepped into the awaiting elevator, Julian following immediately, the closing doors sealing off her past life. She pressed the button for the ground floor. The subsequent descent was not a fall from grace. It was the vertical ascent of a launch sequence. As the elevator doors parted onto the bustling chaos of Fifth Avenue, the flashbulb lights hit them instantly. The paparazzi were waiting, a mob surrounding a sleek black Bentley. Cameras exploded, the noise of shutters clicking sounding like machine gun fire. Shouts rained down. "Elena, is it true you own Sterling now? Mr. Thorne, are you two confirming the relationship?" What were Marcus's final words? Elena paused on the sidewalk. She slowly slid a pair of oversized black sunglasses onto the bridge of her nose. She turned directly toward the nearest camera, pausing just long enough to deliver a mysterious, utterly triumphant smile, the kind of image that would be dissected on financial and gossip magazine covers for the next 6 months. Then, she gracefully slid into the waiting car. She had signed the divorce papers 5 years prior in quiet, humiliating defeat. But she had orchestrated her grand return, her ultimate victory, louder than any thunderclap. And that, my friends, is precisely how Elena Valois, the overlooked partner, transformed a signature on a spousal agreement into the ultimate, devastating corporate checkmate. She did not yell. She acted. She proved, unequivocally, that silence is not a sign of weakness. It is the sound of meticulous, powerful preparation. Marcus Sterling foolishly believed he was discarding a broken, irrelevant woman. Instead, he was unleashing a financial titan who would inevitably return to conquer the very empire he thought was his own. This saga reminds us all that your true value is never defined by how cheaply others choose to treat you, but by the immovable certainty of what you know you are worth. Marcus Sterling bet against the odds, but he forgot the single most critical rule of power. Never, ever underestimate the person who helped you faithfully build your throne. If you enjoyed this epic saga of high-stakes business, calculated revenge, and triumphant justice, please do me a favor and smash that like button. It truly helps the channel grow and reach more power players. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new episode of Billionaire Diaries. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think Marcus truly deserved that $10 million? Or should Elena have left him with absolutely nothing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next installment.